everyone. Welcome to this New York Society for General Semantics event called This Baffling Department of Human Activity, Exploring the Dimensions of Artistic Expression. I'll tell you more about that in a minute, but first I should explain I'm Peggy Cassidy. I know a lot of you, but not all of you. C, we're in alphabetical order. I'll introduce the panelists in a moment.
So you speak in Spanish, he said C.
To my knowledge, only one person on this panel speaks Spanish.
And not very well.
Oh, I meant him. So, but I digress already. I'm the president of the New York Society for General Semantics. I should introduce our other board members who are here. Is Terry here? Terry Manzella?
Yes.
No.
Where? No. She may be here at some point, in which case I will say there's Terry. Our secretary, Len Straight, who is also the president of the Institute of General Semantics. Our treasurer, Tom Gencarelli. Where are you, Tom? Who is also the treasurer of the Institute of General Semantics. And two of our board members, Terry McLuhan is back there, and Michelle Schacht is up here. As you know, our NYSGS events, are you pointing at someone? Oh, I thought Tom was saying you forgot someone. Okay. He's just whoop, whoop, whoop.
Oh, okay.
Okay, thank you. Our events are always free, but we always encourage you to join the Institute of General Semantics, which is a modest membership of
$50 regular members, $25 if you're a student.
which gets you the subscription to the quarterly journal, etc., which Tom Gencarelli edits. It gets you into the Alfred Korzybski Memorial Lecture and Symposium every fall, and dinner, and a guest, right?
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. Discounts in the bookstore, and am I forgetting anything?
But the lecture and dinner will be October 3rd with the symposium following. That's Friday, October 3rd. You can save the date. There are members-only pages on the website with kind of resources that you can access. Discounts on the books we publish.
Yes. And this, by the way, is the first time in my time in this group that we have a competing event. We're going to have to talk over this piano, this party next door. So we'll be extra loud and projecting for you because we always want microphones and we never seem to have them. So this event, where it came from was the idea that so many of us in the general semantics community are involved in some kind of creative activity, some sort of artistic endeavor. There are as many of you out there who could be on this panel. It was sort of hard to know who to ask and who to hope will come and talk later in the course of this evening. So when I went back to Susanne Langer's book, Philosophy in a New Key, what's the subtitle? Anyone? Mm-hmm. A Study in the Symbolism of Reason, Right, and Art. She describes artistic expression as, I borrowed this baffling department of human activity. And I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here. I don't need to persuade anyone in this room, I don't think, that the arts matter, right? I mean, but in the world right now, I suppose it's up for grabs, right? But I always, as a dancer, then going into graduate school, turning academic, first encountered Langer's book, probably in the first year of the media ecology program. Yeah, Missy's nodding, she was in that class with me. It just resonated with me so much to think about this idea of propositional or discursive versus presentational or non-discursive symbolic forms, and as a dancer, presentational, non-discursive, writers, not so much fiction or poetry, but academic writing, propositional, discursive, and I just loved it. I just thought it was so interesting. And so now in this capacity, I got to thinking about what if we collected up a group of various kinds of artists in our community and talk about this in whatever way makes sense to talk about it. So what we'll do is I will introduce our panelists. I have brief bios so you know who you're going to be hearing from. I'll try to lead a reasonably organized discussion of some kind. I think this conversation might kind of have itself, but if anybody gets out of hand, I will try to rein it back in. And then we'll put it out to you all, for Q&A and discussion, and we'll just see what we get, right? So here are our panelists. There's me. I'm sort of minor panelist. I'll jump in at times to talk about dance, but I'll defer to anybody else depending on time. In alphabetical order, Harley Erdman is a playwright, translator, and theater scholar, and a professor of theater at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. He has written librettos for the operas The Scarlet Professor and The Garden of Martyrs, both with composer Eric Sawyer. He's the author or editor of 6 books. His Women Playwrights of Early Modern Spain won the Josephine Roberts Award for Best Scholarly Edition in the field of early modern women and gender. Michelle Schott is a singer, songwriter, and member of the board of directors of the New York Society for General Semantics. She received 2 Grammy nominations in 1988 and 1992 for Best Contemporary Folk Album, and her song Quality of Mercy was featured in the companion soundtrack for the film Dead Man Walking. She is a fierce artist's rights champion, for which the Media Ecology Association awarded her the Jacques Ellul Award for Outstanding Media Ecology Activism. Lance Straight is professor of communication and media studies at Fordham University, president of the Institute of General Semantics, and one of the founders of the Media Ecology Association. He is the author of 10 books, including Media Ecology, An Approach to Understanding the Human Condition, and Concerning Communication, Epic Quests and Lyrical Excursions Within the Human Life World. He has published 3 books of poetry, the most recent being First Letter of My Alphabet, which, as you can see, is up here. Paul Thaler is a professor at Adelphi University with me. Terrence Ross is also in our department for another week. He's retiring. Paul is author of The Spectacle, Media, and the Making of the O.J. Simpson Story. Recently, he has delved into fiction. His latest book, The Maddening, centers around a serial killer who fashions his murderous identity after the writings of Edgar Allan Poe. Paul acknowledges that he cannot account for why he has moved from his scholarly pursuits to his imaginings about a psychotic killer. I can take a guess, although this is out of order chronologically, which is that after chairing our department for many years, he's now doing it right now, and that could put anybody into the world of horror. Many of you have chaired departments, you know.
Yeah.
So, with that said, what I would like to do is to ask each of our panelists just to briefly give us a little intro to what kind of creative work they do, and however you want to take this, but why that one? Why fiction writing? Why poetry? Where did it come from, or what does it do for you? Harley.
Yeah. So, well, thank you, Peggy. I've known Peggy for many years, and I've heard about media ecology for many years, and I just want to say it is so cool to, you have a wonderful website, the Semantics website. I really enjoy it. I wish all scholarly organizations had something so like delightful and accessible and informative, and I've got my curiosity has really gotten piqued for that, and also for media ecology, and also especially you have the most awesome meeting place of any scholarly society. So I'm really excited to be here. I work in, I guess, dramatic writing. Well, I'm bifurcated. I do both. I'm an academic, so I do scholarship. I write academic articles and books. But I also have a creative practice as well that I've done over, now sustained for, 30 or more years. My thing is dramatic writing, script writing for the stage, for live performance. I write, depending on the project, original plays, librettos in collaboration with composers who write the music for operas. Musical theater, where I'm writing the so-called what's known as the book, which is the dialogue and sometimes the lyrics for plays, for musicals. I also do translations. My niche is Spanish and Latin American theater, and especially 17th century classical Spanish theater, which I love, and I've done both kind of more traditional translations and also like loose adaptations and musical adaptations of works from that period. So I'm really at home right here in this space here with all the pictures on the wall and also all of you here in the room. So I started, I'm not sure if this is it, but this is a roundabout way of answering your question, little Peggy, but I started...
You haven't seen roundabout it, so you see some of us.
The way that I express myself creatively has always been like dialogical. I've never felt the need to write a poem. I mean, I've written poems on occasion, but like, or stories or narrative, I've always, like when I start creatively putting things on a page, it's always characters speaking to each other. And that goes back to when I was 7 or 8 or 9 years old. The first works that I wrote was really with and for my brother. I wrote really zany plays that were inspired by old Marx Brothers and Three Stooges movies that were on in the afternoons endlessly in those days. And I wrote stuff in dialogue, is how it came out. It's a way that I understand and process the world and express myself creatively. Not through any one particular position in a play, but actually through the multiplicity of voices that tell a story and lead somewhere. So that's what I've been doing, and that's what I love, and that's what I'm drawn to. My work is always collaborative. It's, well, like, you know, when I'm working on a musical or an opera or even a play that doesn't have music, I'm always working with or thinking about who I'm going to be collaborating with. So that's part of the starting place. It's very interpersonal that way. It's never me alone in a room. At times it's me alone in a room, but it's generally me in conversation with someone else from a very early part. And that goes right through the rehearsal process, right up to like opening night and all of that. And that's, I think, one of the main reasons I'm drawn to doing what I'm doing. It's a very communal thing. It's not, it has lonely moments, but it's not lonely at all. And the last thing I'll say is that I have no explanation for this as well, but I'm not, I love watching TV shows, streaming shows, movies, but I'm not drawn to creating dialogue or stories for that medium. I love like live performance. I love the experience of what I'm working towards ultimately being shared in a live room with people in the moment in a way that changes a little bit from night to night. I find energy in that. I find energy right here just being with all of you. This is a kind of theater right now. This is a kind of performance, obviously. I love live music, love going to hear live music, opera, musicals, rituals, sporting events. It's the liveness of performers, some kind of subject matter, and an audience interacting that makes this the medium that I do, rather than writing for the screen. So I need to speak louder. Okay, well I said it already, so I'm sorry, but I'll speak louder next time. And thank you for letting me know. So I'll carry my, how's this? I have my mic up closer to my mouth. So anyway.
That's his daughter looking horrified. Thank you.
I'm good. Thank you.
A bunch of thoughts I want to come back to, but thank you for starting us off. Michelle.
I'm going to take a cue from you because I just got back from tour where I lost my voice. So I'm going to speak to you from here because I don't have the projection I usually rely on. And how I'm going to speak to you is with an assumption that we are, each of us, creators. That's really important to me because in the introduction Peggy gave, I'm an activist first and foremost, and my bête noire, my antagonism is an existential threat. I want to see if I can conspire with you to all agree that we are under an existential threat, not just humanity, but the humanities. And I'm talking, of course, about artificial intelligence, where in England a bill is being proposed that we will have to opt out to not have our works ingested and training these large language models. To me, this is an existential threat and a disaster. So I'm going to speak to you all as creators and assume that you all agree with me. Okay, one hand clap. Down with AI. I started out writing songs in my bedroom because that way no one could tell me that I was doing it wrong if I wrote my own songs. And I was discovered by an Englishman who was going around this campfire with his Sony Walkman and asked me to sing a few songs into his Walkman. I said, sure. And then he took it back to England and released it as a record without telling me. And the next thing I know, my friend comes back from Europe with a magazine, and the magazine was, remember those flexi discs? You rip them out, you put them on the turntable. And the flexi disc said Michelle Shocked. I was like, well, I'm Michelle Shocked. And the song was called Who Cares? And I'm like, I don't have a song called Who Cares, but when we ripped the flexi disc out and put it on the turntable, it was my voice sped up, of course, because the batteries in his Sony Walkman were so bad. And I was going, this is my most recent song, and it's called Oh, Who Cares? So ta-da, I'm in the music business. But what happened was that when they signed me, they had their eye on this particular song, was kind of like my signature song called Anchorage. I wrote a letter to my friend in Dallas, but the reply came back from Anchorage because she had moved with her husband to Anchorage. So that was kind of like my signature song. But I had told the label at the time, I'm going to make 3 albums and they're going to be different styles. So the first one's folk, kind of folky. The second one was big band, swing. I love big band Louis Jordan. And then the third was a style called bluegrass, at the time not really well known, but you know, since then it's gone mainstream. I said, once you've looked at those 3 projects, then you can decide what I am. That the whole picture doesn't come together until you see the different parts. And then after the 3rd album, I discovered a hard truth about the arts, which is that to have a right as an artist is one thing, to negotiate for those rights. To exercise those rights, that's an entirely different proposition, because the corporations that you're working in, the media structures that you're working in are so powerful, and you're one person. And basically they put me on ice, and I had to take them to court and sue them for violating my 13th Amendment right, which is not just the amendment that prohibits you from being used as chattel labor, but also the one that prohibits you from being foreclosed from employment. So, like Pharaoh to Moses, the day before the case went to court, they were like, take your masters and go. And I've been an independent artist ever since. So all I want to close with by saying is that I don't write songs. I wait until I have an idea that's big enough that I can write a song cycle. So that's something that I don't think is that innovative or original, but no one taught it to me. When I first started writing songs, come on in. They here's chairs. Hey, right here in the front. Have a seat. Was when I first started writing those songs in my bedroom, they just like fell out of the sky. Like, where did that come from? I didn't know. But over time, I became enough of a journeyman as an artist that I felt like it was like if you train as an archer, it's no longer a question of, am I going to hit the bullseye? It became a question of, which bullseye shall I hit today? So that's where the song cycle practice developed from, was a concept so big that you could keep writing around that concept and feel like you had really wrung it full of its meaning. So I have a project that I'd like to talk to Harley about called Indelible Women, which was a collaboration with a painter who chose these portraits of women so iconic, I say their first name, and you know who I'm talking about. Ella, Frida, Georgia, Audrey, Amelia, Billy. And then I had the pleasure of researching their biographies and writing a little song portrait for each of these women. So that's one of my song cycles. It's called Indelible Women. That just gives you an idea of what I'm talking about. Thank you so much. I'm so impressed you guys are here tonight. Thank you.
Lance.
I have to follow that?
I know. Sure.
Well, I'll stand because it actually helps with a group this size. But what was the question again?
About your practice.
Your creative practice. What do you do? Why do you do it? Where does it come from?
I mean, I guess the answer is I don't know, but
Thank you, sit down.
When it comes to poetry, I think you could say that we're all born with that, and then we get weaned off it and onto prose, especially as we learn how to read and write, which is where prose comes from. It comes from being literate, where poetry is, the vocalization, the oral quality that we all start out with. So, I think as kids, you're encouraged to write poems. Actually, my mother wrote my first poem because I came back with that assignment and I didn't know what to do. And she said, well, how about this? And I said, it's, oh, great, and then I wrote it down. So, that was something that was part of the childhood. And then, getting into the teens, everyone wants to be a rock star back then, so started to think about writing songs, which is also about writing lyrics, but it's a little bit different. Along the way, and I think there are kind of two competing qualities for that for me. I think for a lot of people, that there's the intellectual and the creative, and they're both present and they can work together, but ultimately you have to favor one or the other, that you can't totally even them out. And so I moved on more towards the intellectual, but even around it, like when I was in my 20s, I got involved with a group of people and we were doing comedy writing and we wanted to do like the next Monty Python. But sadly, there was no such thing as YouTube and no like camera phones and nothing. Like we did one time we went to a public access cable station in Metuchen, New Jersey, and did something. But we just didn't have the opportunities. I'm so jealous of the young people today who have all this, possibility to do things, and really that's what opened things up for me as well. So it was around the time, I instead went on the intellectual route, and after getting promoted to full professor, it's like, well, what am I going to do now? And my colleague Paul Levinson, who's in addition to being an academic, is a novel writer. In fact, back in last March, we had a book launch for his most recent science fiction novel about the Beatles. There's an alternate history about the Beatles. So, and we had it right here. And he said, we had like a kind of mutual interest in new media as well. So first he said, you should start a blog, go on Blogger, Blogspot, and start one. And it's like, okay, and I did that, and it's like, all right, this is kind of fun, whatever, learning stuff. And then he says, well, you should also go on this site called MySpace, which was where was the social medium of that time. So I set up a profile on MySpace, and it's like, okay, what do I do here? I send out friend requests. The nice thing about that was you're making friends with people you don't know, as opposed to what we tend to do here, with let's say Facebook and all. But collecting friends and all of that, like that. But I didn't know what it was for. And it was actually one woman who I connected to on MySpace said, well, there's a whole poetry group here, and you should check it out here. And she gave me some links to, and they had a kind of blogging there. Blogging software is part of that. And I took a look at it and I said, oh, this is interesting. I think I'd like to try that. So I started to write poetry on MySpace and put it on blogs. And the nice thing about that was that, people commented, you commented on other people's poetry, and that's what got me started. And it's sort of like impelled me to, try to keep going and post something new. And then some folks who I were connected to, it was really a sense of community. Some folks wanted to actually sort of move backwards into print media and started kind of a publishing company. Well, being an academic, I know something about publishing, actually a bit more than a lot of folks in academia, so I helped them to get things set up. And so along the ways, I got involved in this poetry kind of thing, and have published 3 books of poetry. People got after me or were annoyed that I didn't bring any books for sale at the at our last Alfred Korzybski Memorial Lecture, because the most recent book I did wasn't published through the Institute, it was published through another group, but I brought some copies here if you want to buy a copy. It's called First Letter of My Alphabet, so that's my, that was my 10th. Actually, I'm up to 11 now. My most recent IGS collection is technically now out. That became a kind of outlet, for me. It's still connected to the intellectual life, because it's like I got all this stuff in my head, and some of it comes from folks like McLuhan and other media ecology folks, from Korzybski and general semantics about language, which is certainly part of this whole thing. And then some of it comes from my religious background as well. I mean, I've been involved in my synagogue and that religious liturgy. Through MySpace, I discovered Leonard Cohen. I don't know how I missed him, but it was like, oh my God, this is like a kindred spirit. I mean, this is exactly the kinds of things that are running through my head and that I'm doing. It's informed by that kind of liturgy. I mean, all of these things are just, it just becomes another way to recombine and bring out a lot of this stuff. And we turn to poetry. I mean, it's sort of ironic in a way, Peggy, that, you start out, you set this up as sort of like something other than language, and yet every member on this panel, except for you, are specific, have creative forms that involve language, in one way or another. But I think, when we get to the poetic expression, then we're turning away from what we're trying to do intellectually, which is to communicate, at least if you're not like someone like McLuhan, or if you're not French, that you're trying to communicate as clearly as possible, to educate, to get across things in a logical and comprehensive kind of way. And here I'm trying to disguise ideas and just play with the form and the sound of things, because it goes back to orality. A lot of it is about just the sound of language and how that can connect to the underlying meaning of what we're trying to express. Because of starting out working with blogging, that really instilled in a way that, for me, a lot of what I did with writing poetry that I don't do with writing intellectual stuff, where I've always been at a typewriter or at a keyboard. With poetry, I like to do it with pen and paper. So it involves that kind of, in a sense, physical quality as well. And then putting it out on a blog got me to think much more so than I would otherwise about the visual aspect and these sort of structural elements that go along with it. But all of that is about formal qualities rather than conveying meaning in a very, sort of clear, organized, and linear way. And that's kind of liberating, and it provides an alternate way to just get out whatever the hell is just like running around in my head, which is what it's what it's been about. Thanks.
Paul.
I guess I'll stand up too then. I have to begin with a family brag. My brother actually was Leonard Cohen's pianist, so he actually told me. I take no credit for that, but so Mr. Cohen is kind of in our family life in some way. As far as kind of, well, I have to acknowledge just being here, and I know you kind of mentioned that, but it's been about 10 years since I've actually sat in one of these seats, but I go back even further, about 40 years, and I'm now catching up with some of my old dear friends from our media ecology days. Those days when I was totally confused about what media ecology was, and really was trying to understand when I came into that office. And there was this gentleman sitting in his coat and tie, holding court among students who were coming to him. And I was just deciding whether or not, well, do I want to actually join this program, which I had no idea what it was about. It's not a good way to start a program. And I was actually coming off of a career as a journalist. I was writing for newspapers, magazines, and all that. And just wanted to kind of move on, try to figure it out. And of course, Neil Postman was there, our savior, our mentor, and for the next period of time, years, and not just the years in classrooms, but years afterwards, I could honestly say we were family in that office, outside of that office, on our trips to the Catskill Mountains for our biannual get-togethers, where music and conversation and love was really shared during that time. And I haven't seen some of these folks for a number of years, and I've returned. It looks like time really hasn't passed. Even though we're a little grayer, a little older, we're still the media ecology crowd. With that said, so I came off this career as a journalist where essentially my job was to ask people questions, and I would take their answers. I put it down on a news story or magazine story, and that was pretty good. But I felt there might be something more I can do with this indistinct yearning, if that's the word I had, to kind of move on. And so I joined this media ecology group. And there basically I was kind of doing the same thing. I was taking, instead of interviewing folks, I would be taking thinkers, great thinkers, and kind of taking their ideas and kind of trying to translate their words in some papers or into my own kind of understanding of the world that these folks have very articulately kind of described. It's really a multidisciplinary, challenging field of study, frankly, that I'm still figuring out, frankly, having to do with media ecology. And that got me back into writing, frankly. My thesis for that doctoral study had to do with this new experiment. Bill was working on it as well, one or two other folks, having to do with this new New York experiment, having to do with allowing cameras into criminal trials in New York State. New York State was one of the last states in this kind of experiment. And it really was one of the most remarkable times in terms of my professional career, because I was able to use my journalism along with my academics to kind of write about this dynamic experiment. And at that very time, there's a major trial that was taking place involving this lawyer living in Greenwich Village by the name of Joel Steinberg. And Joel Steinberg was accused of killing a 6-year-old daughter during that time, and it was televised. It wasn't just televised in the United States, it was televised across the globe. I actually spoke to a colleague in Australia at one point. They knew about the Steinberg trial from television. And it was very dynamic. I actually went up to Dannemora prison for a couple of days. I interviewed Steinberg in a small little room. I spent 3 days choking on smoke, cigarette smoke, but it was very, very enlightening, just seeing his mind at work. And Peggy was mentioning about subsequent works having to do with serial killers. I think it might have started right there, right there with Steinberg, because I actually do go on to write a subsequent book having to do with the O.J. Simpson case, media and the Simpson case. And got to interview a whole bunch of folks, not Simpson, but a whole bunch of folks associated with that television trial that you're all familiar with. That year was the year of Simpson, and it was the television year of Simpson. And then I really thought I had, the old question, what am I going to do next? And then I thought, all right, well, I'm kind of used to hearing the voices of my sources give me information. My own mind is a voice. It's talking to me in a sense. Maybe I'll get into fiction. Maybe I'll interview myself in certain ways. And I had the audacity to think I could write a memoir. and it really was the audacity. And so I wrote a book about growing up in the old Bronx, my Bronx days. I thought it was terrific. It was great. Look, all your interest, right? You want it? Well, anyway, let me put it this way. I wrote this, and it actually took quite a bit of time, a year and a half, 2 years, to actually write this. And I remember giving a draft over to my good friend out in LA, who's actually a scriptwriter, and he read the book and he said, Paul, I know your family is going to be really interested in this. And since I was going for a larger audience, because I even wasn't sure about my family, frankly, at that point in time. So I converted that book. And it took another year or so, maybe longer, to kind of convert that into a book called Bronxland, which actually was a better book. It was a better book because now I could actually have a conversation with part of my mind called imagination, and it just took form on these pages. I was genuinely happy with how that book came out. And then, again, I'm not quite sure how inspiration happens. How does it hit us? Whether we write songs, whether we write librettos, how does it happen? And I can't tell you, other than the fact that maybe it is a product of a strange part of my mind, that I decided to write a novel having to do with a serial killer who fashions his killings after Edgar Allan Poe. And Poe, actually, the real Poe, is actually very much a strand in the book. And I discovered a lot about his life. And what really makes this really eerie tonight, as I'm walking in, what is the first bust that I see right over there? Edgar Allan Poe. And so he's following me around. And actually, I did give a reading over at the Poe House on Fordham Road in the Bronx. His house still stands there, and it's just what it was back in the 1830s, 1820s. And it was spooky, it was his birthday, Poe's birthday. And it was remarkable, first of all, kind of discovering who he was. But it does lead me to believe, going from Joel Steinberg, OJ, to, my serial killer, what actually is going on with me? And when I figure that out, maybe I'll talk to you about it. But it's just great being here. Thank you for inviting me, and I hope we can get to a real good discussion tonight. I'm sure we will, and all of you guys have that creative instinct, and I look forward to speaking with you. Thank you. Yeah.
So there are so many things I want to ask you all about, and I'm not sure where to start, but I'll stand, and I'll give a little bit of a little dancer talk, and maybe from there there'll be a question that comes out of it for anyone who wants to take it first or next or whatever. You've alluded, some of you, to this already, that a question of form versus content, and which comes first for you, if there's any pattern for you, or if it really just happens in whatever way it happens, and I'll explain what I mean by way of dance. Dancers really do what the choreographer tells them. It's your job to realize someone else's vision in a way. But a choreographer, sometimes it's that they hear a piece of music and they think, I want to choreograph to that. Like, I'm a terrible choreographer. I have no business choreographing, but sometimes Michelle's songs, some of your songs speak to me like they want to be choreographed, so that's sometimes where choreographers will come from. Sometimes it's a concept, wall or something, right? And then they try to build out from there what movement would work for that, what music they go looking for, the pieces. Sometimes it's a theme, I've had friends who choreograph about domestic violence or about racism or about love or whatever, and so again you go trying to figure out what movement fits that, what costumes, what lights, what set design. And so it makes me wonder, for any of you, like Harley, you've already started to talk about this in dialogue, if that's where it comes from for you, or Michelle, just to sort of go down the line to give you some thoughts about where my head is at with this. In one sense, you've talked about a song cycle, right? That you need an inspiration that then you can build a whole cycle of songs around. I also wonder, though, when you talk about how, when you had that conversation about I'll do 3 albums, knowing in advance that one was going to be, if I understood, one's going to be folk, one's going to be swing, one's going to be bluegrass. So then do you sometimes go from form, like I'm going to write bluegrass songs now? So in other words, you're going from the form and then figuring out what content suits that? I'll finish the line out because it feels wrong to leave anybody out. Like with Lance, does it always come from the idea first and then you build the poem around it? Or do you ever think, I want to work in sonnets, I want to try this form or some other particular form of poetry and then see what you can do with it? Paul, how does this suit you? Well, really, like memoir, I had forgotten that novel, which is lovely, you should read it, originally was a memoir and then worked better as a novel. What comes first for you? Is there no rhyme or reason to it at all? I'll sit down. Anybody?
Well, I think there's no rhyme or reason. I mean, I think you nailed it. Actually, I do a little songwriting too, and sometimes what comes first, the chicken or the egg type of thing? Like,
It's the egg.
it's the egg. Yeah.
Come on.
Well, there you go. That
How can you have a
answers
chicken without an egg?
I got to think about that now. But
Postman taught me that.
but sometimes you write a musical line, right? And that line will give you maybe the feel, the title, the song, and other songwriters work the other way, right? You know what is going in that music. You just have to figure out the notes. So it's a creative process. I don't know how to define it myself personally. Some people are much more structured certainly than I am, and sometimes it's just trial and error to figure out what the form is going to look like, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
Lance talked about poetry being an oral form that is from childhood before you even learn to write, and then later prose is birthed out of that. I know for myself that I consider what I do vernacular. So it's like mother wit or mother tongue. And the example I use is not Leonard Cohen, but Paul Simon. Because think about this, no matter what idiom Paul Simon was writing in, it always sounded like Paul Simon. So he could go all over the world, he could do all these forms using genres, which I think are fairly arbitrary anyway, the way that they get developed. They're just the folk vernacular, they're the idioms that people use when they're like, well, I don't know how to say this, but we've got a dictator here in this country and we got to figure out how to get him out of here. And that beautiful song, I think I can pull this off, is it's Venceremos, El Pueblo Unido Jamás Será Vencido. I was talking earlier to some folks about this experimental composer that I had heard named Frederick Shefsky, and he took that traditional protest song, is it Chile? And he wrote 50 variations of that work and did it in a way that you wouldn't almost even recognize the output of it, except that the core of it had that thread running through it. So I think the humility of what we're all saying here is, and what we share with y'all is that we got something to say, we just got to figure out a way to say it.
Yeah, I'm thinking of my response to your question, Peggy. It's a great question. Can you hear me now? Yes. Okay, all right. When you were giving me the louder, I thought it was a thumbs up, so I thought, I'm doing great, but actually I just needed to be louder. I'm working on a play now, my latest play. It's already been through like 5 drafts, and yet it's still a couple of years away from being produced, but it's called The Birds, the Birds, the Birds, and it is right now it's a musical that is told from the point of view of the birds in Alfred Hitchcock's 1963 movie, The Birds. It's got, for those who are like theater history buffs, it's got a little bit of Aristophanes, the birds mixed in, but it's really the Hitchcock is foregrounded. And my point of departure for that was actually you would know about this, but there was a family get together in Napa Valley, California, a couple of years ago, and I saw all of the devastation from the fires that have taken place there in the last 5 or 6 years. Now those fires are almost everywhere, and they're affecting us on the East Coast a lot. But a little while back, that seemed to be the epicenter, and I was wanting to write something about climate change and the impact. And then going back, just happening to see Alfred Hitchcock's movie around that time on streaming it one night, I realized, oh, that was like a 1963 examination of apocalypse and climate change. And it takes place, as you probably know, in Bodega Bay, California. I thought that was a fictional town, but it actually is a real place in Sonoma County. And Sonoma County is the epicenter for a lot of those fires, and the devastation is right there. So that was the creative spark coming together of writing a play about the situation today, and combining that with something that would be whimsical in relationship to Hitchcock's movie. So I started writing, and I had this impulse as I went through it that there needed to be songs in it at different points. Partly because the main characters are birds. There's one human character, but it's the zaniness and the heightened quality, and also birds sing, right? That's the basic thing birds do. So it seemed like to tell the story fully, it needed to have songs in it. Whether it's a musical or not, I don't know, but at least like a play with songs. So I began to leave spaces in my script as I was developing it for the possibility of songs. But wasn't quite sure about that. And as I began developing it with a director, Jenny Kaufman, my colleague who I've worked with many times, she was like, she shares my sense of humor. She understood the piece. And she said, yeah, I really do think there need to be songs here. So now we have a composer on board who's developing that with us. And now we have 5 songs that we have not yet heard with the dialogue until, that'll happen in March, on March 20th. The first time we'll see how it all works together. But it was only actually in the last draft of the piece that's not been shared publicly that I came to this kind of creative epiphany in the final moment of the play, because there's also a human character in the play, and that human character's journey is trying to become a bird and to escape from the kind of apocalypse that is taking place in California and on Earth by flying up to the upper stratosphere with these birds who were trying to get away with it, and this human being just wants to escape. It's this impulse to, like, when things are going really bad, to just get away, fuck this place, let's go somewhere else. So, and I realized in this creative process, developing the script with Gina and now the composer Greg, that actually the key moment is when the human actually finally manages to sing like a bird. So the final song, which we haven't finished yet, is this moment when this human who wasn't able to sing earlier in the play, the birds sing beautifully, but in the final song, the human can finally sing as well as the birds and joins the birds in harmony. So all of a sudden I had this moment 2 or 3 years into the process of like, oh, now I see why this has to be a musical. So now I feel justified. But getting there was like, a friend of mine who's a painter has said that she does a painting not because she can see the painting, but because the process of painting it is a process of discovery, and it's only through doing the painting that she arrives at a place of seeing what it is. And that's kind of what it is 95% of the time with writing. There's impulses, and then you have to like work through something with many drafts with other people to see, hopefully, what it is at the end of the day. So.
You know, since you mentioned the birds, pop quiz, Tippi Hedren says she's taking a course at Berkeley in that movie. What's the course that she's taking?
Oh, is that true? Oh my
Yes,
gosh.
she's taking a course in general semantics.
I have a new idea for my play now.
Send you my bill. But you know, since you bring up question of, in a sense, the formal structure, and this comes up in poetry, and folks will say, like, if you're stuck, in writing, write a sonnet, that, and there's something about the more formal the structure, the more it unleashes your creativity. I mean, for myself, I find the sonnet very unnatural, and it's like, Shakespeare, cool, but like the 10 syllables, just it doesn't sound right to me, and I think it probably sounded good for Elizabethan English, but it just doesn't sound right to me. It's the same thing. So I've written a few, and I've tried to do some weird things with them to just make them feel better for me. But and it's like the haiku. I know people who've written whole books of haiku, and I just find it's a Japanese form, and it fits the Japanese language. And when you try to do it in English, it just, you get something. And I've done a few of them. I actually did one. I tried to work it into more of our kind of structure. So I did it where the first and third lines rhyme, and then the middle line rhymes with the next stanza's middle rhyme, and just sort of tried to figure out a way. I do like rhyme. I certainly don't do rhyme all the time, but I probably do it more than people, contemporary folks do, because I like that, and that's the kind of musical quality, and rhythm, that these, but I always find it's always like a 7 or 8 syllable, 7 or 8 beat, and I think that's probably matches the 4/4 time of rock and roll, which is what's always running through my head. I don't know. Maybe Tom knows a music or Michelle that has like a 10 beat to the measure kind
I bet
of.
you clave, I bet you rumbas.
Yeah, it just doesn't work for me. It doesn't sound right with my language and my understanding of English. But even when it's sort of like free verse, if you like, or there still has to be a sense of rhythm, and again that the oral quality where the sounds of the words go together, or there's a sense of play with puns that goes on. Sometimes it'll just start with taking some words and seeing what kind of pun I can make from it, or how I can take a phrase and just turn it into a completely different phrase that sounds the same, but really it's just saying something different, but makes some kind of connection. And that to me is when we can just play with the meaning and let the meaning kind of come out of the form, rather than have have function dictate the form, so to speak. But that is really what we're talking about in this kind of work.
I'm intrigued because among this group we have a couple different things going on. When Harley was talking about collaboration, some forms of creative work are very collaborative and are by necessity collaborative. And then others are or can be very solitary, and I'm thinking that Harley and Michelle are very much more in the world of collaborative creation, where writing poetry or fiction, granted there may be an audience, some of you were here for the book launch for Lance's this book in this room, right, where Michelle read also some from this book. But I mean, the actual creation is a pretty solitary thing. You might bounce it off other people, but it's yours. I don't even know what my question is, but I'm just curious. What is it that you're sort of isolate? Like, do you like to work alone, and you two are more extroverted? I don't know. Not
I'm
really.
chicken, and I want someone else to be there with me, so I'm not so lonely. I mean, it's nice to be being part of a team. It's hard. It's very hard expressing yourself and putting yourself up on stage. Even though I'm not physically on stage the way Michelle would be, I couldn't even imagine that. But still, it's your words, it's your work, it's your ideas, and I think having, maybe it's some kind of strange, maybe cowardice is overstating it, but being part of like 2 or 3 or 4 people who are together in something is much easier for me, and more comforting and more rewarding to me than having to go it alone. So.
I mean, you could feed me some more ideas, but I'm looking at TC, whose medium is film. And it's a given. She will always be collaborative. But she's the conceptualist. She's the point that brings it all together. Or Tom, as a songwriter, the style of songs that he writes has to have a drummer, a bass player. It's like just even producing in your head before you, I don't know, do you write the songs with the band in mind, right? It's not, but you're the point person.
We do lots of ways.
Do you write a song that says, no, it's just me on guitar, la
Yeah,
la
all
la?
the time, sitting on my bed. Yep.
Well,
With no name.
What? I'm sorry.
A song with no name.
Well, yeah. I mean, they all.
After you know what.
They all. Yeah.
I mean, who else got examples of what I'm describing where the conceptualist drives it, but the medium, the expression of it's going to be collaborative. There's no way you can do it all by yourself. What else have I overlooked? Dancers, right? Always is going to be a production. So really what we're, go ahead.
Well, I just had a thought here. As a movie maker and writer, screenwriter, and I'm addressing that to the screenwriter, have these ideas that appear for you appeared in dreams prior to your actually putting them on paper or
I was going to ask you
and
guys
so
that.
on. I've had so many different experiences.
No. But it's a great question because sometimes, I'm being facetious, but sometimes solutions to things that I'm working on come
Right.
through dreams. But the initial inspiration, I've never had it come to me that way.
It's never
so.
appeared in a dream. That's fascinating.
No, but I'm really
Well, how
interested.
about walking down the street or in an elevator or on the subway? Has that ever the initial?
Always. My ideas come when I'm walking. I love walking. I could walk.
Same here.
I do walk like 20,000 steps a day, and
Oh.
that's generating ideas and processing everything.
It just
and,
happens like that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's
I've had very, once I had a breakthrough, I don't know, I once was walking in the woods and I took a step and these two birds of prey just like jumped up I was almost stepped on these like hawks that were just in the bushes right where my feet were. And somehow I think there were 3 of them actually that came out. It was really extraordinary. And I had the play piece I was working on, I realized that there needed to be 3 versions of the main character rather than one, like 3 avatars, like young, middle-aged, and older. And it just happened. That was a very unusual, but I have like, I have just like instinctive things or things that happen that way, but it's always by walking, for the most part, not by sleeping. So.
Thank you.
Now that the subject of dreaming has come up, is anyone here familiar with that Santo and Johnny instrumental classic, Sleepwalk? Can you think of the melody? Because I guarantee you know it, you just don't know that you know it. That's the one. Look, okay, so this is an example of how conceptually I write these song cycles. I want to do an entire song cycle where I take these vintage 50s instrumentals, and there were a lot of them, and write lyrics to them. I've been such a wicked fool, telling tales out of school, secrets I can't keep when I'm walking in my sleep. Check this out. I had a dream so soft and mellow, dreamed I held you in my arms, but to my surprise, when I awoke, my sweet fluffy marshmallow, when I woke, my pillow was gone.
Anybody?
Well, Harley has 20,000 steps. I have about 20 hours a day where I just sit. And it is productive actually when I'm writing. I have to be in a man cave, the door shut, no one knocks on the door. I have to get lost in the chaos of thinking, creating. Someone dares to come in. I don't know how I react to that, and it's interesting writing. And there's a whole bunch of writers here in this audience, and everyone has their own way of dealing with this isolation. Any outside stimulus it really does get in the way. And my son actually is a screenwriter also, and the other week he was actually home for a period of time, and he's very diligent. He also sits 20 hours a day. Not quite, but he's just very isolated in what he does. And I made the mistake. I actually went into the room and I said, Matt, I'm a writer. I could help you out with this. And daggers were sent out. I said, I'm in the middle of, there's a great line, and it applies to this. There's a great line in The Shining. It just comes to me. So there's Jack Nicholson. He's sitting in this big hotel, empty, vacant room in the middle of winter. You know the movie, right? And he's just sitting there at his typewriter, and there's a typewriter, and there's a stack of papers there, and he's not writing anything. He's just sitting there. And his wife comes in. What was the name of the actress again?
Shelley Duvall.
Shelley Duvall, milquetoast, very shy, very timid. And she says to her husband, she says, honey, why aren't you writing?
Oh.
And he stares at it with those daggers, and he says, I am writing. This is typing, this is writing. And that line always stayed with me. This is just putting it down on paper. And I kind of feel a little bit like that too. This is just the keyboard, that isolation. I understood more exactly, if that's the word, years and years later, what Jack Nicholson was talking about in that film. So.
Well, Walter Ong said, the writer's audience is always a fiction. It's just an interesting way to think about it, that and he was thinking about, sort of like getting into a room, closing the door, and writing. I would just say, in terms of, and that certainly is the experience for me for the intellectual writing, and it's like, and it is that, almost that paradox of needing to be isolated in order to communicate. But I find poetry is something different, where it's just like something that I would do at any odd time, and not when I plan to do it, except that I have to have a certain kind of notebook with me. Sometimes it's when I'm traveling, like on an airplane or something, if I'm not totally wiped out. But I also find that at least some of it has been in response to people. Someone asks me, can you write something about this? And it's like, okay. And so I'll do it because I was asked to do that. It happened a lot more, again, back in the old days on MySpace, where someone would say, well, can you do something with Alice in Wonderland? And I was like, okay, I'll see, and come up with something. But for some strange reason, it seems to come up now and then, more recently.
I think every artist, whatever the form, will start projects that for whatever reason in the moment don't happen, don't come together in some way. I'm just curious if any of you can speak to that idea of anything you may have started or tried, and at the time it wasn't, it couldn't happen, but later it worked out. In other words, like you needed to live longer or experience something or hone your craft more. There are some things you might want to be able to do, but if your voice can't do it, I don't mean your voice could ever not do something, but like your voice can't do it, or as a dancer, you don't have the technique yet. Does that resonate with anybody?
Well, I just say I write fragments, and then maybe later on I'll just be going through and I say, put some of these together and find that they work.
I'm about to ride my hobby horse. You better jump in here while you can.
Harley's nodding like he's got it though.
No, go ahead and ride. So yeah,
Okay.
yeah, go for it.
Keep
Yes.
me on a short leash
Yeah,
here.
so, yeah.
Keep
I
me
got
on a
my
short
watch right here.
Okay, pull in, Michelle. Listen, the only copyright was written into the freaking Constitution. It was not in the amendments. It was written into the Constitution. Before a black man was determined to be a full human being, he had copyright. Before a woman had rights to property other than her husband's rights of ownership, she had copyright. Copyright was written into the Constitution because the framers were trying to incentivize creators. And that is the existential threat that is at stake here, is that what was given to us as a right to incentivize us to put in the labor to create and to make that available publicly for the good of the society is being taken away by these mega tech companies who will take whatever you create, anything you create, anything you write. It could be an email, it could be a memo, it could be anything, and ingesting it into this machine, turning it into sausage and grinding it out. And I can say this as a creator, what has resulted for me is I can have concepts all day long, and they're good concepts. You want to hear them? Nuh-uh. Not sharing them. I'm keeping them close to the vest, and it's undermining the whole point of this endeavor of why we create and why we share. So this is my hobby horse, and I'm almost done, but I'm going to just say, for all the positive things that you hear about what artificial intelligence may or may not be able to do, it's too high a price to pay for what we will be losing in our cultural equity. And thank you for letting me be a part of this, just so I could get that off my chest.
Yeah, my only, yeah, go ahead.
I was in response to Peggy's question, not to answer it by any means, but Alfred Korzybski wrote, the founder of General Semantics, that he says creative people know very well from observation of themselves that all creative work starts as a feeling, an inclination, a suspicion, intuition, a hunch, or some other unspeakable affective state, which only at a later date, after a sort of nursing, takes the shape of a verbal expression of creation. So, I thought that really hit to the point.
Thank you. I was looking for something like that, but Korzybski is it's a long book. Anyway.
594.
Oh, you're in the reading group. Some of us are I do half that reading group every Monday night. We all get on Zoom and read Science and Sanity, but I have a ballet class that I'm always running out of, and I just hop in at the end, so I haven't been as good about it. Anyway, Harley.
I love that quote, thank you. The one thing I thought about when I was a much younger writer and academic, I had what I thought was this really cool idea. I was working in translation and adaptation of Spanish plays, and I had two plays that I really loved, and I was trying to find a way to kind of smush them together into one original adaptation, and I was workshopping it, and I was getting excited about it, and no one else seemed to be excited about it. And for a variety of reasons, I put it aside for 15 years, and when I came back, just really with just wisdom and maturity and simplicity and the idea of a little less is more and not trying to overreach, I said actually just one of those plays is really enough. And so I just focused on adapting one rather than smushing. I did a little less, and actually that opened everything up, and that piece was really, really successful and wonderful. So in a way, it was just kind of the time to back off and not try to outsmart myself with something was really helpful in that particular instance. So.
Yeah, that's maturity lessons more. Interesting. I also, as I'm listening to our panelists, I'm also thinking of what I know about some of you out there. We've got musicians and visual arts, right? We've got a screenwriter and a novelist. We've got all kinds of people who do all kinds of things, and so I feel like I should let you all have some say here. Can we do some Q&A and what do you want to talk about? Yes, way in the back.
Michelle?
Yeah.
So AI is really very much a threat to the...
Can you stand up?
Michelle, AI is very much a threat to the voice recording business, which I'm very involved with, having a facility. I was at the Audio Publishers Association International Summit about 3 months ago in New York, and they're all looking at it. All the publishers are looking at using it. There's these models of signing up talent in a way where the replicant voices are actually quote used in a particular way. My own thoughts on it, having been in technology a long time, there will be a point of opportunity where if AI becomes so ubiquitous and so almost human-like, it will go on strike, and then we can unplug it. At that point. So just saying. But it's an interesting thing too. I wrote a particular piece that was very much related to AI. Richard Brodigan had written a piece, all watched over by machines of love and grace, in the 60s, and I wrote a piece of music to it. And of course, being who I am and wanting to make sure that I secured the rights, his daughter said no. So of course I could not register it and did not want to register it. So, unless I want to either throw enough money at it or not, it's one of those things. But it's, as a one-off, not a cycle, it wasn't worth it.
Nice top spin. Thank you.
Others?
I have a question.
Yes.
Lance, you alluded to this earlier too, but amongst the panelists or anyone else, in your creative state, what's your weapon? Pen and paper or computer and keyboard?
That's a good question.
Pen and paper.
I like how you said just like this is writing, this is typing.
Yeah.
If I could just jump in, because it just reminded me something, Mark. Many years ago, Neil Postman took a group of us out to what was it? The Violet.
The Violet.
Right. We'd have lunch, and I still remember that vividly. He would take out his pad, and he would start to write, pen on paper, and I would watch him. And if there was a correction, he'd have a line. He'd write a correction on top of the line. And correct me if I'm wrong, gang, but I don't think Neil ever put that down on the computer. He gave it over to his assistant to actually put it into book form or into manuscript form. What's that?
Yeah.
Filtered flare pen.
The black flare pen.
Yeah.
I
On yellow
worked as
legal-
his
yellow
assistant for a
legal
while,
pen.
and yeah, it was always yellow legal pads, black flare pen.
Yeah.
Everything he did, he wrote, and then he bought me for his use a laptop when laptops were new, and my job was to type it up and read it back to him, read it, so he could hear.
Yeah.
But he
Yeah.
mouthed the words as well, and
Yeah.
he insisted if it doesn't sound good read out loud, it won't read well. That was his rule.
Yeah.
So do you do that too, or?
I don't know if I mouth it, but I actually
But do you hand it?
I do. Well, yes and no. There are ideas that come, and I have to write it down because it'll be out of my memory. But there comes a point where you're just sitting down at that computer and you're doing that computer thing. But I always thought about Neil because he would say there's really two types of writing. There's writing pen and pad, and then there's writing on a computer, and your mind just thinks differently, it works differently. And I understood that longhand effect, 'cause when I do write longhand, it does free me in ways that the computer doesn't. And not to say it's ever a first draft, but it's a liberating feeling about that in its own way. And yet eventually you kind of just sit down and you do it the new way. But what do you write about? Did you write about 20 books?
25, I believe.
25 book-
Tom, you 25?
What, Neil's books?
Yeah, how many?
26, yeah.
And if we could just wrap our minds around the fact that he would be writing this by hand, it's quite remarkable. I mean, the way that he would think about writing, and kind of intimidating, right? I mean, 26 books, right?
I journal every day when I can, always with pen and paper. I recommend it to everyone if you don't do it first thing in the morning. It's so helpful. My actual writing though, writing a script, a play, is always on a laptop now. And there's actually, there's a form that's quite, the story behind this is I have a student or mentee who is in the visual arts, and she just ended up, for the first time ever, reading a role in a play at a workshop 2 weekends ago. And she had never seen a play script before. She'd always worked in the visual arts. She also did poetry, and she was like, whoa. She was like, she was blown away what she thought was the beauty and the poetry of the actual format of the script. So I had never thought about before, but it is, talk about form and content. There is a form to dramatic writing, to scripts. Screenplays are a little different, but there's some stage directions are set aside in italics in a certain way. There's character names are in all caps and they're tabbed over to a certain piece. The dialogue is always flush left, and then there's a space between each speaker. So that is the form that I'm comfortable with. That's what I go. That's what I do. And it's you have to. I've never thought about how that could be done with writing, but it's just there's a comfort and a beauty to me to like. I did it once upon a time on typewriters, and now I've just transferred that. But that is the form through which dramatic writing takes place. There are apps that will do this for you as well, and programs and things like that. But part of my writing is character speaks, and then I have like a moment of pause as I'm thinking, and then hard return, next. Another little pause while I write, and then the name of the character is speaking next, and then their line of dialogue. It's kind of I love that form. I love the actual format of it on the paper. So.
Harley, you know what that reminds me of is there are mathematicians who will spend years in their mind solving one huge math problem, and the form that you've described, you said a lot of what you do is dialogue. By following the form, you can literally leave blank spaces. I don't know what this character says, but he says something back to that character. And it reminds me of how a mathematician goes about solving a very complex math problem where they don't know exactly how it works, but they know what the result is because of the physical evidence that they
Do you find that with writing a song? Because you must have like a lyric that's you can't figure out the rhyme or the line or maybe what the bridge is. Do you like leave things blank and go back, or does it just kind of come to you?
It's happened more with the song cycle process.
Yeah, okay.
So the fact that I know there's going to be 10 of these songs and one of them is going to be this. So I get to just assemble parts like a junkyard and go, okay, this one's going to go in this junkyard, this one's going to go there.
Are you working with a guitar or a piano when you're composing?
I started out writing with guitar and thinking like, I wrote this song called If Love Was a Train because I discovered that the B7 chord moves up the frets and it looked like a train track. And then when that Indelible Women song cycle that I talked about, it started with those doo-wop classics like In the Still of the Night. And all of those were 3 chords like what I play on the guitar, but I started writing on the piano, and I don't know how to play the piano, but I know 3 chords on the piano in the key of C, so I started writing all the songs in the key of C, knowing that someone could play the piano better than me and transpose them and make them better, but I just needed that basic structure like you're describing with the script.
So does it all live kind of up here until you're with the person who can write it down or arrange it or get it into the key you want, or I wrote all the songs and I refuse to record them because the minute I record them they're gonna be snatched. It's like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, y'all. That's what we're living with the reality of. But as long as they're here in my head, nobody can get to them. I can sing one for you. If you turn off the camera. We'll get there. Other questions though? Who is that? Yeah, Mike.
Yeah, just going off of this last discussion, all artists push against boundaries of some kind. And yet there's always some boundaries that they respect. So I'm wondering, for whoever would like to answer, what boundaries are you pushing against, and what boundaries do you like to have in place?
Good question. I'm not sure if this is a boundary, Mike, but time is always a boundary. We all have complicated lives, but you know, where do you find the time to think long if you're a writer? You know, and that's been that's a frustration. You know, you sit down and you realize you only have an hour, you only have 10 hours, you only have a week, and you realize you need a month, or you need 6 months, you know, and it gets frustrating. I mean, we were talking before, you were mentioning about envisioning projects, Peggy, and actually, I was thinking of the opposite that happened to me, having to do with, actually I was contracted to write a book on World War II. I didn't know much about it. I mean, I knew what I wanted to do. I won't get into all the details about it. But I thought I had a great idea. Got a contract, wow, terrific. And I got halfway through the book and I stopped. I could not figure out where I was going. So maybe it was a mental boundary, it was a time boundary, it was the complexity of writing that book. And that was the only book that I actually started and actually had to return a small fee that they gave me up front. And to this day, that disappoints me, you know, because that was a failure. And there, whatever the boundaries were there that maybe is even inarticulate, you know, it was there stopping the process of creativity. Or in this case, it wasn't even creativity, just kind of finding a hook into what else I wanted to say. So
Boundaries are kind of self-imposed, so it's like, how far can I push myself, you know, or can I do something worthwhile, or is this just trite and stupid? And you know, and I think you know, a lot of people go through that of just, you know, wanting to just rip it all off, you know, especially right after you've done something. You know, it's at that point that you say, oh, this really sucks. Why did I even think this was any, you know, at all worthwhile? But you know, and that's where you have to impose, on the other hand, you know, your own boundary of, well, it's good enough. It's not great. It's not as good as other people, but you know, it was worth doing, and I'm glad to just have put it out there. And that's kind of you know, a constraint you put yourself under when you just have to say, you know, I'm going to just yeah, I'm just going to swallow it and say, you know, maybe somebody will like it, maybe, you know, maybe it'll communicate to someone, and that's really all that matters.
About 10 years ago, I made a very radical choice. I paid a very high price to do it. I didn't quite have the language to describe it as artificial intelligence, but I could tell that people were coming to my shows and recording them in spite of me saying, please do not record this show. So something was informing my decision, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And so I pulled all of my work out of distribution. And now if you look for my work online, you will find it nowhere. A type of boundary, a sacrifice that I've made. But I remember being told, they can take away your career. They can take away your ability to communicate or express to an audience. The one thing they cannot take away, and I'm using the word they ubiquitously to say, there are people profiting from the creative labor of others. The one thing they cannot take away is your creativity. And so the choices that I have made are very much a boundary or a limit that I have put on myself. But I remember in Chelsea going around the galleries and discovering this artist whose last name was Miotte, M-I-O-T-T-E. And in his lifetime, no one really had heard of him. But after he had died, he had enough of a body of work accumulated that when they launched his career after he was dead, they were able to launch it in all the capital cities, like 6 different major exhibitions at one time. So time even is a fairly arbitrary limit when you're talking about creativity, because posthumous works can have a bigger life than the creator that made them.
But Michelle, don't you think that as a creator, you're depriving your audiences of your gifts?
Yeah, I'm so glad, Jackie, that you're bringing that up, because the sacrifice feels like it's mine. Like, the first thing you do when you write a song, you're like, hey, check out what I just wrote. I remember when I wrote that song, Anchorage, I was taking care of this woman on the Upper West Side, and I played it for her, and she goes, you may not realize what you have there. And I go, I know. I knew what I had. So to deprive myself of an audience has been a big part of why I've been drawn to this community, because I've got to solve a much bigger problem than just my own, creative career. And I trust that, what Lance shared with me, with Jackie a little, and he talks about the word responsibility being not the ability to take account for something, but just the ability to respond. And that's my sense of existential threat of these machines that we're building that we don't know how they work. Jerry Seinfeld says we're smart enough to invent AI, we're dumb enough to need it, and we're too stupid to know if it's a good idea.
Others? Anybody? I have a question for each of you as a kind of wrap-up question. So what's next, or what are you working on now? And we can stop the camera at the end so you can sing us a song, right? So let's go in reverse alphabetical order.
Actually,
Paul's chair right now, so he's not working on it.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, I'm just revealing this for the first time, so you must all promise not to let the secret out. I'm sure I trust you all, because the book, actually, it's a novel, has to do with academia. And I realized after being 40 years in, I think I have some feeling about academia. I actually talk about changing one's mind and going in a different direction. I had a sabbatical last year, a book idea, and as it turned out, that book idea wasn't great, at least in my own mind, after a while. But then this other book idea came about. Write, the old adage, write about what you know best. And actually, certainly the chair's position gave me an insight that I probably had before. But I'm going to do a fiction having to do with a professor on campus. Try not to identify too much where I'm located, and move on from there. Because if there is ever an environment, a media environment that is full of discussion, conversation, debate, it's the American university. So I'm going to try that one out.
Is it going to be a memoir? A fiction? It's
No,
just fiction.
it better be fiction. No, it better be fiction. Yeah.
Lance, what are you working on?
Well, so much of what I'm working on is on the intellectual side, but and I try to find some room for the creative. So last year, a year ago, I published that book, which I have some copies if you want to buy them. I still have, I think a lot of people write poetry, and I remember actually the fellow who got me connected to the Players, my old colleague, passed away some years ago, miserably, who was a playwright. And like a lot of people who, in terms of poetry, you just have like this whole bunch of stuff that is just sitting around, hasn't been published, or maybe like a few things that get published. If you really, it takes a lot of work to try to get them into the magazines and stuff and all of that. But so I still have a big backlog. So I certainly, just in terms of stuff that I've even conceived of another book. I've got like a whole nother book worth of poetry that's like pretty much ready to go, or could be broken into 2 or 3 books. you know, depending on the size of things. And then there's like more material that are just in a kind of you know, work in progress state that's just collecting in a notebook. So you know, that's kind of the state of things, you know, on that. And then there's like other stuff scattered. You know, there's some of my kind of back, you know, decades ago, some of those comedy scripts that I think at some point I might want to put into a work. And more recently, I did some years ago, but I did a series of, we call them Purim spiels. They're like musical comedies for the Jewish holiday of Purim that are based on the Book of Esther, but they're parodies, and you know, mine include a lot of parody songs as well. Yeah, I mean, so there's a whole lot of just other kinds of things that I could throw together in various forms that, you know, as time and you know, possibilities permit, you know, that I can put out there in different ways. So I don't know.
You do seem to know it.
Well, you know,
You do know.
there are different ways that these could manifest themselves, and you know, for the moment, I don't know what will turn up next.
You go.
So, well, I told you about the birds. So that's literally what's next. But I will say briefly in closing that I think, like many people, the election was really upsetting, and I'm still dealing with that. And at the same time, it's also like one way of my processing those feelings is I'm coming up with a lot of ideas that are not literally about like the election, but it's generating ideas. So I'm in a generating place, and speaking to people I know in the field and my students, as I teach playwriting too at UMass. Like there's a lot of ideas cooking right now, and there's a need for people to gather, to create things, and also to hear things. So I actually think it's a challenging time, but I actually think it's going to be a really interesting time and an important time for art making and theater making and performance right now. So I think it's like I'm excited about what's up next. But I have ideas, but I'm not ready to say them aloud because I'll jinx them. So.
That's okay.
You have
And then-
concepts of a plan?
Yeah.
What is the name of this panel again?
This baffling dimension of human activity.
Yes, I have baffling dimensions of human
Department,
activity.
excuse
I have baffling dementia.
And so, if I may, if Mark will stop the camera, I should also thank all of you for coming, so that's still on the video for YouTube someday. But now we'll stop that.